So, by now I'm sure we're all aware of how great a game Elden Ring is. I mean, it won Game of the Year in 2022, but I personally consider it to be Game of the Decade for redefining what we should expect from open world action RPGs moving forward. From the music to the combat mechanics, Elden Ring is as close to a masterpiece as I think we're going to get when it comes to open world RPGs. But it still has some problems, and I feel it's important to address those problems in the hopes that they are fixed or improved upon in future installments. So I want to lead off by saying I'm not a hardcore Souls veteran. I've played a good chunk of Dark Souls 1, very little of 3, half of the Demon Souls remake, and an embarrassingly low amount of Bloodborne. I know. Look, I'll get around to it whenever a PC port or PS5 remaster comes out. With that in mind, I still love the Soulsborne games and the challenges they present to their players, for the most part. I'm saying this to give you some perspective on the kind of player I am, as I think that factors heavily into what I think are actual problems in Elden Ring's design. So, what actually is Elden Ring's biggest problem? Why do I feel the Flask of Crimson Tears is an outdated mechanic? Well, I'm glad you asked, disembodied voice in my head. I believe the problem stems from a change in enemy and boss design from Dark Souls to Elden Ring. Enemies and bosses are much more aggressive in Elden Ring, and the Flask wasn't designed with this added level of enemy aggression in mind. The Flask really feels like in a holdover from older FromSoft games, included out of tradition rather than necessity. The Flask, or Flask-like items, are a staple of the Soulsborne series, and FromSoft knows this. It is a key ingredient in any Souls-like. Dodge roll, tough enemies, a bonfire, and a healing item that takes 3 seconds to use. Unfortunately, the Flask's design just doesn't work very well in Elden Ring. It feels like all the other systems got a much needed rework, except the Flask system. In order to explain this issue properly, I feel I need to give you a quick crash course on how I feel bosses were designed back in the original Dark Demon Souls series. Bosses back in Dark and Demon Souls were designed with a much more turn-based feel in mind. Remember, there really wasn't anything quite like these games at the time. Most RPGs were turn-based or pure action RPGs like Devil May Cry or God of War. Bosses in Dark/Demon Souls were designed with fairly clear attack and punish windows, which allowed the player time to decide what action they wanted to take in any given moment, much like a standard turn-based RPG. If the boss just finished their attack and was open to damage, you could either take that damage opportunity or retreat and sacrifice that damage phase for a sip out of your sweet healing flask. As long as you dodged the boss's attacks properly, you were almost always guaranteed this level of decision making against bosses. A lot of the bosses and enemies in Elden Ring do not work like this. Most bosses you fight in this game will not give you a clear damage window or phase. Rather, their damage windows are just long enough for you to counterattack, but not long enough for you to heal. They won't just finish an attack and then wait for you to get your licks in before retreating. Instead, bosses have combo branches and react to you based on distance and actions. If the boss just finished their attack, they'll wait and see where you are and what you do next. If you're really far away, they're probably going to use a ranged move or a move that closes distance. If you're really close, they will continue on to a different combo branch. This makes bosses in Elden Ring feel very dynamic, and as many other people would say, aggressive. We can see examples of this in the Margit and Crucible Knight fights in Elden Ring. Both have long combo branches and will trigger based on the player's actions and positioning. As a result of this aggression, there will be many times during a boss fight when you will dodge a boss's attack, choose to sacrifice a damage window, get some distance away from the boss, go to heal, and the boss will simply rush you down or interrupt that healing with a ranged attack. Yes, I know there are certain ranges and positions you can be at that will allow you to heal safely, but learning where those positions and windows are takes multiple attempts at a boss. For example, Margit will almost always try to throw a dagger at the player if they back away and use a flask. This tends to make players feel like the bosses are too aggressive and don't give them their turn even though they feel like they did everything right and earned it. So, how do you fix this? Constant trial and error until you completely memorize every attack string and combo branch of every boss and figure out the precise distance and location you need to be to avoid having your healing interrupted? Sure, if that's what you find fun, more power to you. But my own personal philosophy is that a well-designed encounter should be one the player can beat on their first try as long as they are appropriately leveled and have good reaction time / game sense. I beat Godric the Grafted on my first attempt using reaction, spacing, and aggression. So I know this design philosophy is totally possible within Elden Ring. So, what is the solution? I think the best way to solve this problem is to change the way flasks work in Elden Ring, and any of its sequels moving forward. The change is actually pretty simple. Instead of flasks working as usable items, they instead function as an additional amount of health or magic based on the number of flasks in your inventory. The best way I can describe this is to compare it to Metroid's energy tank system. Each flask grants a set amount of bonus energy to the player, and this amount is increased using sacred tiers. So, if you would start the game with 3 flasks, and each flask grants 25 points of extra health, you would have your base health amount plus 75 additional health granted to you by those 3 flasks. Perhaps you could indicate this extra health with something like a magic glow around the player, or an additional color bar over your standard health bar. If you've ever played Halo, the effect would be similar to shields in that game. I'm sure many of you have experienced this scenario before. You're fighting a boss for the first, or maybe 12th time, and you're doing pretty well. You're learning the boss's moves and patterns and when you can and cannot attack. You take a few hits because you're human and you've made some mistakes during the fight, but that's okay. You still have 3 flasks left so you can heal up. You'll just back off from the boss, heal up real quick, then get back into the fight, only to have the boss hit you with a new move or combo branch that you've never seen before. Beautiful. Back to the bonfire you go. Nothing sucks more than dying to a boss while you still have flasks in your inventory. This change, I propose, fixes this problem and makes bosses and other enemy encounters solely about fighting the boss. I also think this makes the game feel more immersive. Have you ever noticed that bosses in these games tend to have way more health than you? A boss can kill you in 1 or 2 full combo strings, but you need 10 plus combo strings to put a boss down. This shatters my immersion. If I'm role-playing as a tanky knight in full armor with sword and board, I still have to play like a sneaky rogue, because rolling out of the way of boss attacks is still the best method for staying alive in a boss fight. Yes, I am aware shields are really strong in Elden Ring, and that you can tank and parry through a lot of attacks in the game. But you'll still be taking chip damage from those attacks, and good luck healing when a massive boss is doing anime-style combos in your face. If you have a heavy equip load and can't dodge roll, you're screwed in a lot of these boss fights because you really can't make the space you need to heal safely. Okay, look, I'll be completely honest. I'm not entirely sure how this change would affect the balance of the game, but I definitely think it would make it a more fun experience. It would also encourage much more aggression and well-paced boss fights, since you don't have to worry about running away for 3 minutes while you look for an opportunity to heal. Also, just imagine how healing makes the bosses feel. This tiny little gnat of a Tarnished is nibbling at my ankles, and every time I smack it, it runs away and heals up before coming back for more. It's like fighting a Tracer in Overwatch. I also feel this change would benefit mage and non-strength focused builds, since you would no longer need to worry about dumping 30 levels into vigor so you can have enough health to survive in-game attacks. Just turn some of your flasks into healing flasks, and bam, you have enough hit points to survive most big attacks from bosses. This would eliminate healing in PvP, but I think that would also be fine since players would have larger health pools. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. I'd love to know what you think down in the comments below. If you have a different solution to the flask/healing problem, I'd love to hear that as well. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Oh, also, like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. Later!